Okay, welcome everybody to the next episode of CISO Talks. With us today is Helen Rabe, who's held a number of high security positions in her career and has now been in the role of a CISO at the BBC for just over a year now. Thank you for joining us today, Helen.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
So really what I'm going to kick off with and where we're going to start is, do you think there is any one factor which has really brought about the huge change to the role of CISO in recent times?
Any one factor? I wouldn't say it's a single factor. No, I would say that the visibility of cyber into the business. In other words, I kind of compare us to a hotel sometimes. We're no longer the back of house function that we used to be, right? It's the visibility and amplification of cyber as a result of high-profile incidents. It's just becoming something that boards themselves are now required to be more knowledgeable about. Mm-hmm. There are a number of factors, no single thing, in my opinion, no single thing. And I would say that certainly having moved the teams from that back-of-house invisible, I call them my invisible ninjas, into sort of bringing them forward, not all of them, because many of them prefer to stay behind the scenes and do the good work, but some of them you do need to bring to the front so that they can start to PR campaign, if you will, what we do, who we are, and how we do it. Yeah. And that visibility is necessary because without it, people, if you're one of those brilliant teams that are so good at your job, nobody even knows you exist, which is often where our legacy has been. We've been good, we've been quiet, then people don't understand the value that we have. So no one thing. I'd say a number of things have certainly brought us to the fore. Okay. And help change the role, because the more that you bring everything to the front of the house, the more prominent the CISO role becomes. I'd also say that CISOs themselves have become far more vocal in the last few years about what the role requires of us, where the role should sit, a contentious point. Mm-hmm. So we've become certainly more forward facing into the business itself.
So obviously during that you mentioned the word like team an awful lot. I think traditionally, it's always been thought that the CISO sits on their own and does their work and, like you said, in the background. But do you feel now that the value of an actual team around the CISO is becoming more and more important and more prominent? I
feel that that's always been an imperative. Certainly, well, look, anything I speak to you here today is subjective and based on my experiences, right? I can't speak for other CISOs. But from my side, the team is the imperative. Without it, I can't do my strategy. I can't deliver. I cannot operate. Mm-hmm. So for me, surrounding myself with a brilliant team has always been the number one requirement for me. That team is what delivers the successful security strategy, the successful security operations. I'm going to use the word security too often. Just go with it. Mm-hmm. But I've never isolated myself from those teams. They are absolutely the key to my success and the success of what I bring as a CISO. Mm-hmm. So if any CISO sits in isolation of their team, I would query, how they're doing that. I just can't see it working.
Yeah. Okay. He says we've had discussions with other CISOs where they've felt where the job's changed and they've moved into both the front of house and like the back of house as well. And like you were saying, I think where like trust of a team is now essential. I'm not always sure that where we've talked with others is that they've had the ability to trust their team fully.
That is actually quite sad to hear. I trust my team implicitly. Mm-hmm. I absolutely do. And, when people say to me, this is going to sound arrogant, it's not my intention. What is the measure of a successful CISO? How did you become such a successful CISO? The success is the team. Without them, I'm not successful. So I don't feel isolated. I never have done. The way I would say that leadership takes up 70% of my role. It takes up a mammoth amount of my time to make sure my teams are engaged, that they're following the vision. That means the strategy outlined, they're supportive of it, they're delivering to it, that they've had input into it. And that's key for me. So it's not just my senior leadership team defining a strategy in isolation of the rest of IT, security teams, or even IT for that matter, because there are stakeholders from IT that are part of the conversation. But my teams are always engaged and they have an open, safe space. That sounds wonderfully trendy, but they do have the opportunity to come in and say, look, you've shown us the strategy, Helen. We're on board, but we feel that these are still areas that are gaps. So prior to delivering the core strategy, I have socialization sessions with each of my SLTs and their teams. And I go through at a very high level. This is what the intention is. This is the proposal. But what we really need is we need you to come to the table and say to us, do you support this? Do you believe we're missing something? Do we have a blind spot as a leadership team? We're not an ivory tower. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're a measure of a democracy, so to speak. But at the same time, I need to make sure that I love perception. Perception to me is just one of the most valuable things. And I have only so much to give based on who I am and how I work. But my teams have far more breadth of knowledge and experience in their line areas. So why not leverage that?
Absolutely.
So I've never felt isolated, and I do bring them to the table, all of them.
Fantastic. I mean, that's really great to hear, and really refreshing as well. Like I said, in some of the conversations we've had. So moving on in terms of like the role, obviously that you've got now at the BBC, is there anything that's really surprised you about that role, or like big learning like opportunity you've had within the role that you didn't expect to come your way?
Yes, and yes. I can't go into too much detail. Has anything surprised me about the role? Actually, yeah, the fact that I'm enjoying it as much as I am. It's a phenomenal role. I'm very grateful to be trusted with it. The surprises, they keep coming. It's certainly given me exposure to things I never believed were part of a CISO role, but certainly none that I regret. The experience is just hugely invaluable for many reasons. But what has been the biggest and most pleasant surprise for me was I network a lot in the industry. I'm well known, and that's a necessary part of the job. But I had seldom networked with people from the BBC, and I've been doing it for about 10 years now. So I was reticent coming in as to what I would be faced with, who I would meet, what would my team be like. They have been the most incredible surprise because they are phenomenal. The transition into the role has been a bit of a baptism of fire, but it's been made easier by the fact that this team from day one have been incredibly supportive, and they're just so brilliant. So yeah, that has been the biggest surprise and the most pleasant surprise.
That's fantastic to hear. On to more like the workings around your work as a CISO. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, obviously, with the increasing use and like prevalence of AI now? Like, what's your thoughts in terms of bringing that into cybersecurity? Do you think there's more pluses than there are negatives, or is there a lot to think about before we even?
I'm still processing. And I'm a ridiculous purist on AI, so it's machine learning for me on steroids at the moment. But the inflection point is here, and I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's going to move at such a rapid pace, and we're going to do everything we can to keep up. So security technologies leveraging AI. I'm watching the scene. I'm seeing, and I have a security technologist who supports me on this. So he's paying very close attention to it. Now, the business is certainly utilizing, generative AI and these sorts of things. That poses a different challenge, and we have to keep up to speed with that, because the business likes these tools. They love to use them. That's the way businesses work. Playing catch up is an unfortunate side effect of what we're having to deal with here. There is huge potential on both sides for the security side, and I'm going to speak to that. For us, it's about the areas where we can automate, and that was mostly the first line analytical roles and what have you.
Yeah, of course.
But one of the challenges, and we've been discussing this as a leadership team, is that if we're going to be bringing in these solutions and these tools, what happens to the people? And we can't stand aside and say, right, we're going to be bringing in all of these tools and just go, it's your responsibility to stay relevant from a career standpoint. Mm-hmm. This is a threat to your job, the nature of the role that you've undertaken from a career standpoint. So what we're doing, obviously, is investigating the tools and seeing the opportunities. But at the same time, we're being very, very clear with our teams and saying to them, right, this is the future. This is where it looks like it's going to go. We want to work with you to continue to upskill you so that they complement you rather than replace you. Mm-hmm. And if you find that the role is going to be replaced, then what do we need to do to upskill you to make sure that you stay within the InfoSec team and that your job can evolve into areas where generative AI or AI tools or what have you will not replace you? How do we help you to retain and stay relevant?
Yeah.
So, there are two sides to this. One is the AI solution itself and the benefit it brings and the value it brings, whether it's cost, whether it's speed, whether it's efficiencies, whatever the benefit is. But then there is the people element, and I don't believe as leaders we should have them. They're not mutually exclusive for me. Mm-hmm. We have to take care of our teams in this regard and make sure that they are also supported. And that's been well received, right? Because what I don't want is we don't want a fear-based culture where we're going to come in with a solution and people are just going to suddenly say, so I'm being replaced. We don't need that measure of defensiveness. What we need is the engagement to ensure that they don't feel threatened. So it's keeping that holistic approach going that I'm seeing from an AI standpoint. And truth be told, that is the sum total of where I am. I'm making sure my technologist keeps me up to speed on what we need to do, what's coming up, what should we be focusing on, where can we reap the benefits of AI automation. But at the same time, then I'm working with my teams to make sure that the people element of that supports bringing that in because they know they're not threatened. So a balancing act.
Yeah. So it's like another part of the CISO role really is like the parenting of your team then is to help them through like the challenges of... I
guess I could call it parenting for a non-parent. That's an interesting thought process for me to take in. But I think of it as leadership. Yeah. I never got leadership for the longest time because I am an introvert, contrary to what many think. And I avoided it, actively avoided managing people. I just didn't believe I had what it took to do it. But now that I'm in the role and I understand the responsibilities that come with that, I honestly I can't remove myself from that because everything has a human element involved in it. And as a good leader, which I hope I will be remembered as from a CISO standpoint, my people matter, my teams matter.
Absolutely. In light of that, in terms of, you talked about like effectiveness and the strategy and so on, how do you track that, the effectiveness of your cybersecurity and posture, and then like communicate it to the stakeholders? Is there like ways that you do that in order to make sure that it comes across?
I have no defined and set manner in which I do this. And this is simply, and I'm probably, there's a number of my peers probably cringing as they listen to this. And the reason is because every organization I've been in, the language is different. Okay. The language of the business, the language of the stakeholders, whoever those stakeholders are, whether they're my senior leadership, whether they're my exco, whether they're my board, the language is different. I need to learn the language of that environment to be able to understand how best to communicate what we're doing, the value it's bringing. So for some, it's an ROI concept. Mm-hmm. For others, it's a progression against the CMMI baseline. For others, it's a measure against the risk portfolio. I have to learn that language, and then I have to take the approach that meets those needs. So one size does not fit all in this regard. I have found that for boards and for stakeholders that are not au fait enough with security as a whole, that the CMMI, as remedial as it may be, is quite effective in showing, the needle's moving. Here's your investment. Here's the needle is moving in line with the target state. So if you're a target, if you're a current 2.8 or whatever that means, and your target state is 3.5, you can break that out. You can delineate that into this is where your investment's going to go, and you can show the natural progression of the move of the needle towards that 3.5. That's been very informative in the past for people who cannot necessarily conceptualize what security is.
So it shows that impact statement.
It does.
The way that it's working. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the role of the CISO in the boardroom in like the modern job? So
that's contentious. Nice. My thoughts, again, subjective, mine alone. Be careful what you wish for. All right, in this regard. So more and more of us are getting the opportunity, and I consider it a privilege in some regard, the FaceTime with board level executives. I believe the right CISO in the right role, there is a place for it. Do I believe that every CISO needs to go to the board? I can't say, because as again, each company is different. Yeah. For me, I've been privileged enough to actually have had FaceTime with boards in all of my roles, with the exception, I believe, when I was head of InfoSec at Costa. But each of them since I've had board FaceTime, each board has been unique, fundamentally unique in the way in which they want to receive information about security, the way in which they process that information, and the way in which they then act on that information. So it goes back to something I made reference to earlier. Know the language of your board. That means identifying each of your board members in their own right. Who are they? What's the tenure on the board? What other boards do they serve on? Right? There is work to do. If you are going to have that time and that face time with the board, you need to take the analysis and information and use it to your benefit and also their value. These are extraordinarily busy people with limited time. So you have to go to these sessions well prepared, well informed, and be clear on the value that you're bringing and meeting their needs. So you need to do research in advance. You need to get to understand who these individuals are. And it takes time to earn the trust of a board, right? It doesn't happen overnight. These things take time. And once you're there, you need to be prepared then for the pressure that comes with it. Because once you've set that benchmark, once you've set that expectation, it doesn't stop. The asks and the demands of you become more. Rightly so. You wanted to go to the board, you've got the FaceTime. You may think that they don't have much time, and they don't, but be clear, they have attention to detail, so never take it for granted, because that attention to detail puts you on the spot all the time. You often find that one of your board members is a stronger ally because they have an affinity for the subject and they're more familiar with cyber. They're normally the strongest and most vocal of your board members when it comes to the topic of InfoSec and cybersecurity. Really ally yourself with that individual. Have the socialization sessions in advance of the core board meetings. So I'm just giving you basic tips, but I would say that, yes, at the risk of sounding, it's not my intention, be careful what you wish for. Because once you get that face time, you have to show the value and you need to be consistent in that. Yeah. All right. And also you will then be pulled on outside of those board meetings for ad hocs. It's highly likely once you've earned their trust. So you need to be prepared for that as well. I know that there is value in a CISO having the face time with the board, but it also goes back to this. Work as a complement to your CTO, particularly if your CIO, your CTO is not a gatekeeper, but an ally of yours and trusts you. You are there as well to represent each other and to support each other. Yeah. Never work at odds with each other, especially not in the face of the board itself. That conflict cannot exist in an open space like that. There are a lot of dynamics and a lot of politics to consider when you go and represent yourself in front of a board.
So reverting back to unicorn CISOs that you talked about, you said they were a rare breed. Do you think there's anything we can do in order to make them more, rather than a rare breed, actually becoming more and more prevalent, or do you feel it will always remain a rare breed?
This is an area I'm probably going to get into a lot of trouble for. They are a rare breed because, this is where I alluded to the Gary Hayslips of the universe earlier. They have that ability to have the deep tech and the strategy mind, right? And I know some of them, but the benefit in having that they come from the tech ranks into, studying the business and getting those skills. I never did the reverse. I was a strategist, but I've never taken the time to go back into the deep tech. Okay. And that's not where my strengths lie. Do I think that they're a dying breed? No. I believe that there is always going to be a space for them, and I think that you will continue to see them, but they will continue to be rare, mostly because many of us now focus on the business language almost at the expense of the tech, because we have these incredibly strong teams supporting us. Yeah. And because one of the things, and here's another reason why the others are considered unicorns, they have the ability to communicate at those senior levels in a language that is intuitive, comfortable, and easy to understand at ExCo level for people who are not natives of the industry, right? That's another part of the unicorn skill set, where we have traditionally found that some of the technical individuals struggle to be able to take that parlance and make it easy for stakeholders who are not aligned with InfoSec to understand. Yeah. So those will, I believe, and this is again me, subjective, be a rarity. And does it come down to education? No, I think it comes down to the individuals. If you are going to play to your strengths, you are either traditionally tech, traditionally strong in the strategy and the governance side, but if you have that ability to meld the two, there will always be those people. Yeah. It's just finding them and really using them, I think, predominantly as mentors and leveraging those skill sets to the best of their abilities. A part of me wishes I'd had the passion for the technology side.
Yeah.
I don't. I just have no, it's not an interest. It's just I don't believe I have the aptitude for some of it to hold it. But yeah, they're not dying, they're rare. And they're also, one of the things I do find about them, they're very forward-facing into the industry as well. Okay, so they offer some of the best insights and the best mentoring that you can get is from those individuals.
What does the CISO role look like in, say, 10 years, do you think?
Okay. You know how happy I am about this question, since we don't move in even 5-year windows in advance. But look, I don't have the answer to that. What I can tell you is that as technology evolves, so does the role of the CISO. Now, if you had said to me 10 years ago, you're going to be so embedded in privacy and data, you know, your DPO is going to be your bestie, I would have just laughed. What is a DPO would have been my first question. And look where we are, right? My DPO is very, very much closely aligned with me. As a matter of fact, I see them as an extension of our team, and we have a highly symbiotic relationship with them. One of the areas that I take a personal interest in is disinformation. Okay. Now, there's a lot of talk about, and I do talks about this, as whether or not this will eventually become a domain within security. There's a camp for and a camp against, like everything in life. I imagine that as we move forward as a role, the social media, the disinformation element is going to become part of our remit as well. Not a core domain as such, I guess, but certainly it's going to be in the next 5 years, we're going to have to start figuring out, right, that wider threat landscape around disinformation. How do we deal with this? Because it's going to become a part of brand awareness, brand damage. It doesn't matter what your brand is. If you are, you have an e-commerce, you have your Twitter, your TikToks, whatever you want to use them, we are going to have to get involved in those conversations because of the way in which the data is harvested and the way in which the data is, the way in which we use customer data through those channels as well. And security, we speak a similar language, right? We have disinformation SOCs, we have disinformation controls and things like that. It seems like a natural fit as we mature. And much like we did with the GDPR stance, when GDPR first came out, who got the majority of the program to deliver? Security. Why? Well, because, everybody was talking about the security in Article 32. It naturally sat there. And now that we've matured, we have the privacy teams and we have the privacy office and the DPOs. I imagine a similar thing will be. So for the next, I'd say in 5 years, watch that space. I imagine that that's where we're going to get a lot more interest with regards to our remit and security, and do we include this into our fold, so to speak?
Absolutely. I mean, coming towards the end and then wrapping up with different things. Obviously, the role of the CISO has changed an awful lot, and what you've said today is bringing forward even more things that are changing. So, with somebody who is looking to get into the field and looking to move forward within the CISO role, what I suppose, what are the 3 positive tips you would give them to look out for as a priority?
This is an interesting one for me. I often get approached when I do networking events or talks or what have you, and people come to me and go, you're just, Helen, you're an inspiration, blah, blah, blah. And thank you very much. I want to be just like you. Well, don't, okay? I wouldn't recommend anybody be like me, but here's the thing. They want to be a CISO. And then I ask the question, why? Why do you want to be a CISO? What is it you think we do that makes you want to do this role? Be very clear on that. Speak to CISOs, because you will find that we all come in different shapes and flavors. We're a bag of Skittles or Rebels, whatever your favorite candy is. None of us is the same, and we all have very different ways in which we do our jobs. The principles, sure, there are principles that we all adhere to, and we execute them differently. So what is your why if you want to be a CISO? Be very clear on that. It is not, contrary to popular opinion, a glamorous role. I don't believe it's glamorous. And when people say it's just such a glam role, it's like you have no clue. And you really need to be taken aside and have a conversation around the realities of what comes with this role, because it is a 24/7, 365 role. Okay, it takes commitment, dedication. Your stress levels are, I think we run an 80 percentile, basically, constant stress rate. And every so often, depending on the nature of what's going on, you get thrown into that additional 20%. It's not for the faint of heart. You need extreme resilience to be able to do this role in many cases. And it depends on the level of the CISO role, right? So obviously there's the likes of the BBC. Then there is the likes of, the head of InfoSec role I did at Costa Coffee. There are 2 different extremes when it comes to the stress levels. So it's all relevant to that as well. The second I would say then is understand where your strengths lie. If your strengths are technical, if you are a strong technically based, individual, then startups traditionally is a really great place for you to be, because that really utilizes the skill set less so than the governance side of things.
Yep.
I can't speak for all startup roles, but we tend to find that strong technical CISOs who love the tech, they go into those highly technically focused CISO roles, and they still exist, and there is a value in them and a need for them. Then there is the other side. If you're the governance, risk and compliance, and the strategist, that's more me. I won't touch roles that require deep technical understanding and what have you. So find the role that fits with your skills and your strengths, right? There are different types of CISO roles out there. Not all of them are the same. You have the unicorns, like we talked, Gary Hayslip, who is the tech and the strategist. Yep. They are the unicorns, all right? They're a rare breed, and they have the ability to traverse both, but that is a rare breed. And last but not least, the top tip is if you're going to do this role, all right, I hear this a lot. I hear that many CISOs feel isolated. They feel alone. That emotional resilience I talked about earlier is very important, but you have to understand as well that there are times when you will be alone, right? You will be a lone voice, and it's a challenge. The CISO role is still fighting for its, what lane do I belong in, And we're frequently told so this is a contentious one, the reporting line. Do you report into a CIO, a CTO, or should we report into the CEO? I have no answer on this. I don't. I report into a brilliant CTO. And he is incredibly supportive, and he sees me as a compliment to his role, not a threat. He is not a gatekeeper. Right? Yep. You will find roles, though, where you don't get supportive CIOs who are gatekeepers or whatever it is. So understand, if you're pushing for that CEO and trying to break the mold, that's a big mold you're trying to break. So don't do it from the outset. Take your time. Understand the value you bring to the table, prove that value, and then have those conversations. But from the outset, if you're going to start applying for, I want to be reporting into the CEO, as you're going for job interviews and things like that, those are also rare. They're not going to happen yet. I think we're a good 5 years away from some of us being straight into the CEO, CFO lines. Right. Just be patient with where you sit in the stack. Understand your relationship with your reporting line. If you're going to consistently fight against it, the role is not for you. That particular role is not for you. You will find a role as a CISO or a head of that is for you. Just be patient, get the lay of the land, and don't take a scorched earth policy when it comes to your reporting line. Just play it out for a bit.
So that's like fantastic tips for people there. And on that, we'll draw to a close. But thank you so much for joining us, Helen. It's been an absolute pleasure to have talked to you.
Likewise, and thank you again for the invitation. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.